I am super excited, but I got to tell you, it's a confession. Anyone have pet peeves? Yeah? Oh, yeah, we've got pet peeves. Now, does anyone have a pet peeve about something that they themselves do? Oh, yeah, the honest ones are raising their hand. One of my pet peeves is, and I don't like talking about my children because I feel it's unfair to them, is when they fill up a glass of water. And because we live in Westfield, and it was shocking to move to Westfield, I went ahead after about a year of trying to figure out water solutions. We got this water dispenser like it's an office in my kitchen. And so we use this trucked-in water, and it's beautiful stuff. But it costs money, first of all. So my children take a cup, and they fill it up, and they take a sip, and they leave it there, and it sits there. And sits there. And then they come back, and they'll grab a new cup, and drink some, put it there. And so I have on this kitchen island all these cups of water. Maybe one of them's mine, but most of them are theirs. I may have a problem taking cups upstairs to the bedroom, but I always bring them down in a stack of cups, so it's all good. But that's kind of a pet. I'm like, we purchased that water, we poured it into that cup for your nourishment, for your hydration. Don't just leave the cup sitting on the kitchen counter. Total pet peeve. Once again, I'll tell you, I am guilty of the same thing. But I was considering that, and I thought maybe we kind of do the same thing as Christians. Maybe we do the same thing even corporately as the church. Guilty of being half empty or half full, depending how you look at it, cups sitting on the kitchen counter. You see, I believe God pours out his blessings on us that we may pour it out. That we are a vessel used by him for his purposes, and he does bless us. And I don't want to get into this whole, like, in America, we are blessed, and most of us, are rich compared to everybody else in the world. I think we know that, and I'm not here. That's kind of a guilt message. I'm not here to make anyone feel guilty. That's the reality. God blesses us so that we can be a blessing. You see that in Genesis chapter 12, when God calls Abram, who later becomes Abraham, to leave his homeland and to go the way that God was directing him. He says this in Genesis chapter 12, verses 2 through 3. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you. Abraham was blessed so he could be a blessing, and we see that. It's God's plan of salvation. He chose a family that became a nation, and that nation eventually, the hope of salvation, God's plan of salvation comes there to the world. That's the blessing that Abraham gave to the whole world, but Abraham was blessed in the process of bringing that blessing to everyone else. Now, let me be clear, that promise is not for you and for me. He's not calling me to another land to give me descendants like the stars in the sky. It was a specific promise to a specific guy, but when we look at that promise, we do see kind of how God works. There's a reminder there that everything we have is received from God, and ultimately, everything we have should be used for the benefit of other people, for the glory of God and for his kingdom, especially those who don't know him. See, Abraham's blessing was not an end, but it was a means to an end. And our blessing is not an end, but it's a means to an end. We are blessed to be a blessing. That's the intro to what we're doing. But in here, if we are blessed, pouring in, how do we prevent ourselves from becoming comfortable? Of just being a half full cup sitting on the kitchen counter or on the island. Because I think sometimes the Lord fills us up and you guys think I'm only talking about money. I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about money. I'm talking about spiritually, all the different ways that we are blessed. And sometimes if we just spill a little bit out, we feel good about ourselves and we're going to sit with our half-empty cup. But it's only empty cups that get full once again. Blessed to be a blessing. Return with me to Matthew chapter 25. As I said at the very beginning of this message before I prayed, this is a different message than the normal. We're not going to dive super deep and tear apart the original language, although I'll reference it really quick. This is not a deep exposition into Scripture. But this is going to set up the shift that I mentioned 2 weeks ago. You guys remember that? You're like, oh, I haven't forgot You said the word change 2 weeks ago, Pastor. That's why I'm here today. What's that about? By the way, I was here last week too, Pastor, and you didn't preach, and you kind of bummed me out. By the way, thank you, John Knack, Pastor John, for filling in for me on such short notice. He did a really good job. As a matter of fact, I sat in the front row, and I had my Bible open on my phone, but then I clicked over and sent Pastor Jordan a text and said, this could fit into the sermon series. Like, that message was excellent, so thank you, Pastor John. This is Matthew chapter 25, starting in verse 14. Again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story. Now, catch that first verse. I'm going to read it without stopping, but the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated. This is Jesus speaking. By the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. Then he left on his trip. The servant who received 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver, also, I'm just trying to clear my throat. I'm not having a heart attack. I know you're like, and if you're new to the Radiant, that's a long story, so I've had a heart attack. Okay. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give account of how they used his money. The servant who had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned you 5 more. What a goody two-shoes, right? No, I'm just kidding. That's the good example there. The master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. The servant who had received 2 bags of silver came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more. The master says, well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I'll give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. Then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops where you didn't plant and gathering crops where you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back. But the master replied, you wicked and lazy servant, if you knew I harvested crops that I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. Then he ordered, take the money from this servant and give it to the one who has 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into the outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Okay, let me stop. This is a parable of Jesus, and we get in trouble sometimes if we want to read every single detail into some meaning. So let's focus on like the big things as we walk through this, because there are some things here which could make us go kind of some squirrely directions, especially the picture of the master being harsh and this and that. If that's your picture of God, and some people have a picture of God and we're hiding, but that's another sermon altogether. Actually, I do have another sermon altogether in here. We'll get there in a second. Let's talk about what we just read. So for some of you, you grew up with this story, and it was called the parable of talents. Did you hear the word talent in that passage at all? I didn't. You know why? Because it's a different translation. The word, so in the New Living Translation, they call it the parable of the 3 servants because it's about 3 servants. Why would it be called the parable of talents? Because the word that is translated bags of silver here is the word talents in Greek, but talents is not referring to ability. It's referring to the money of that time. It was currency in that time. When I was a teenager, this was confusing to me because I thought the moral of the story was I have to use my talents for the kingdom. I have to use my talents for God, and He gave me talent to play whatever, baseball or ride a bicycle, and I was going to use that for God's glory. And it was a sincere idea, but it was really, in the story, they're talking about money. He's talking about stuff. The point is that there's a large sum of money, and it doesn't even matter, because is it okay to translate a currency to a bag of silver? Because if you translated talents, you just carry the word talents, it means nothing to us unless you look it up. So that's called dynamic theory of translation. It's okay to do that because the big idea and the point is it's a large sum of money. We don't actually need to have the exact conversion rate. Well, how much money is 5 bags of silver? How much money is a talent? The idea is that there's a large sum of money. The master was extremely rich, and he's entrusting a great amount to his servants. Now let's look at verses 14 through 15. Here we see the distribution of these talents, of the bags of silver. The master makes the servants responsible for managing a portion of his wealth, but the servants are given different sums, but they all belong to the master. Everything belongs to the master. They are simply, what's the word we would use here? What's the Christian-y word we would use here? Stewards. This is stewardship. It belongs to the master. We're just stewarding it. And we who are stewarding it will answer to the master when he returns. Then we move on to verses 16 through 17. The master departs, and we read the response, or at least the actions of these 3 servants. The one with 5 bags turns around and gets 5 bags more. Earns it. Invests it. The one with 2 bags turns around and makes those 2 bags become 2 more bags. Now he has 4 bags. And you would think that the next guy is going to follow the lead. Everything seems to be times 2 here. Let me guess. 1 bag gets another bag. Now he has 2. No, this guy, he's afraid. He hides it in the earth. And the master comes back. He first interacts with the 2 faithful servants who say, yeah, 5 to 5. Boom, here's 10. 2 to 2, here's 4. And the master is pleased, and in verse 21 and verse 23, you hear the same response. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, and I will give you many more responsibilities. Well done, my good and faithful servant. And then in verse 24, we get to that servant who hid it in the ground. He returns exactly what he received. The master is not pleased. Then he uses the excuse, hey, I'm scared of you. I didn't want to lose what little you gave me. There's this scarcity mentality like, oh, I got only this, and I don't want to lose this. So he buries it, and he gives it back. The master responds in anger. If you were really afraid of me, at least put it in the bank. It'll draw some interest. I mean, I don't know what interest rates were like back then, but depending on the account, it's going to draw not a whole lot now, right? At least put it in the bank. Giving me something back would have been better than nothing. And then verse 28 through 30. I know we're moving through this passage really fast, and I told you we would. We get to the point. Let me read 28 through 29 to the point. Then the master orders that the money be taken from this one servant, the unfaithful servant who hid and buried his talent, his bag of silver, and gave it to the one with the 10 bags, the one who had 5, who made 5 more. Verse 29, Matthew chapter 25. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. What's the point of this parable? I just read it. Normally I'd have this one point, we'd put it up there, it'd be the one point, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory that we need to be stewards. And now, understand it, it's a story. This is remember the very first verse? This is what the kingdom of heaven is like. The master is away, and one day he will return, and we will give account for how we steward what he has given us. As servants of Christ, we are called to be productive with what God has given us. We are to be good stewards of our time, our talents, this time not the biblical currency, and our treasure. We are to put them, thank you. We are to put them, thank you, random citizen, I love it. That was that whole youth pastor ADD thing. Sorry, forgive me. But we are to put them to use for the benefit of the kingdom as we wait for Christ's return, that he may say to us, well done, good and faithful servants, individually and corporately. I would like to show up together, not leave the earth together, but maybe we show up together. I don't know how time works in heaven. And I'd like for him to look at Radiant and say, well done, good and faithful servants. I said 2 weeks ago, ooh, I'm getting emotional. I'm about to talk like how the office is going to work here in a second. It's really not that like spiritual, but I mentioned 2 weeks ago we're going to make a little shift, and we already made one shift. How can we not be the glass of water that's sitting there half empty, not pouring out all that's been poured into us, not to be a blessing because we have been blessed? How do we prevent ourselves from becoming comfortable and settling for less? We made a shift back in October 2021. We announced it. It took effect in January 1st of 2022, where we would begin tithing from the general fund into missions. A tithe is being 10% of the general fund, which means I now have to operate the church as the pastor. There's a lot of us who operate the church together, but my job is to run this church with 90%, which is kind of what we're called to do. Is if you tithe at home, right? That first time you said, we're gonna run our household budget on 90%. This is a new thing. We're gonna trust God for this. I'm kind of in that same place. I'm trusting God for this. Can I tell you what happens sometimes when you step out in faith? January of 2022 was a low attendance month, snow, Omicron. It was a low offering month. I've enjoyed 3 years of our church consistently going above and beyond the budget. Very rarely have we gone under. But the moment we decided to step out in faith and tithe, we were under. And I was a little nervous, like, all right, Lord. You know, we felt that this was you leading us. I sat with my trustees this past Wednesday, and I told them the story, and they looked at me like, yeah, God's got it. Aren't you thankful for our trustees and their spiritual leadership? Did you hear me? Spiritual leadership. We joke about trustees not being spiritual. The elders are the ones who pray. The trustees are the ones who count money. But money is absolutely spiritual. And they are leading the way, taking the step of faith. We have a missions committee, which is in charge of working with our missionaries, picking up missionaries, setting the amounts that we support. But I look at our trustees, they're not the missions committee, but they are the on-mission committee. I know that's really cheesy, but they are on the on-mission. They're there to steward the resources of this church to make sure that we are on mission. And that's what these shifts are about. So the first shift is, hey, we're going to tithe to missions. 10% of everything that comes in from the general fund, the fund that we use to pay ministry expenses, the mortgage, the payroll, to save for a rainy day, to maintain our facility. We're going to take 10% before we do any of that, the first 10%, and send it. We're going to send it to missionaries and organizations that they could do what they are called to do. Yeah, go. That's what tithing is. And this is the other sermon part that I said was coming. I'm not going to give a sermon on tithing, but I do have to say, because I understand that that's one of those things that seems like, for some of us, it's like, I've done this for so long, I don't even think about it. For some of us, it's this giant mountain that I'm not so sure I want to try to scale. Tithing really is about giving our first to God. I think we get caught up in percentages and old covenant versus new covenant and all these discussions, but it's giving our first to God, not what's left over after we pay our bills. The first belongs to God. And in order to say, I'm going to live off 90 and trust God with that 10%, because really all 100% is God's, requires faith. I had an elders meeting yesterday, and one of the elders and I stayed behind and talked for a while, and he told me his testimony about years and years and years of kind of toiling away. And then he looked at me and said, but you know what? This 1 year, it hits me. And I take a step of faith, Like God says, the only place, this is an exact quote, the only place in the Bible where God says, test me, like bring it on, bro, is when it comes to tithing. He said, I took a step of faith and God began to bless our home and my work, and I'm living a life that I never even could imagine because of just walking in obedience. I'll let him tell his own testimony someday. But it requires faith. Tithing says, God, I recognize you first. I'm putting you first in my life, and I trust you to take care of the rest of the things in my life. Can I say this? It's the most tangible way that we acknowledge that God is first. And now I said, don't get caught up in Old Testament, New Testament. In the Bible, we see tithing under the law. That's how we often think about it, right? The Mosaic law and the Old Testament. But tithing predates the law. It existed before the law. It was an act of worship, an act of trust, well before Mount Sinai and the Ten Commandments and Moses and the law. Then we saw tithing after the law. Christians are no longer under the law, but they continue to tithe as an act of worship. See, Christian tithing is not about, and this was my point when we did a money series a year ago, Christian tithing is not about an obligation to an old law, but it's about living a new life. So the tithe is important, and what we're saying as a church is we're going to tithe on your tithe. We're tithing on the tithe. It's double tithed. To support missions, like double dunked. Now, this is different from the old way that we used to support missionaries, which was once the new way we used to support missionaries, but that's okay. It's the way it was when I first came, and it's the way that I had grown up with. It's the way that I was a missionary. I was supported with so many churches doing the Faith Promise Pledge with the commitment card. We're taking a step in faith and trying this route, going away from the Faith Promise Pledge, because here's how the old way worked. We would have missionaries come and speak. We would have cards. We would say, please pray about a number. Put it down on the card. We'll collect it. And then the missions committee would take the numbers, add them up, and say, okay, this is how much money is going to come in approximately per month. We could support this many missionaries at this much money. And can I say, church, you have been a generous church. By the way, I got to do this. This is the tithe, the general fund. We've already spoken about that. And this is your missions pledge. 2 different buckets, right? So the way this bucket used to work is we would receive pledges, we'd figure out what we can do, then we would support missionaries. And you guys were generous last year. Let me give you an idea of what you have done in the history of the last few years. Last year, you gave $34,000 to support missionaries and mission organizations and missions projects. $34,000. No, yeah, you should. You should. That is an increase of $13,000 from the previous year, where we did 21 in 2020. 2019, 21,000. 2018, 20,000. So you have continued to grow since I've been the pastor here, not because I'm the pastor, just history. Because we used to give a lot more missions too, so it's not about Jerome, just giving you the history. We've continued to grow in the last few years, and we made a leap in 2021. And you're like, Jerome, we made a leap in 2021. We should leave it as it is. Things are trending up. Yes, but just hold on. $34,000 in this bucket last year. But 2022, we're going to not use this bucket. We're going to give 10% of this bucket. And now you have been faithful. God has been good to us. And our budget for this year, if we hit our budget this year, and we've gone above our budget every year since I've been the pastor, if we do 10% of this bucket, we're looking at $54,000 to missionary support. That's a $20,000 jump. So that's shift number one. And listen, the last time we did $50,000 was 2012. So like, woo, you should celebrate that. As a matter of fact, the missions committee looked at this number and said, I think we should raise support for every single one of our 18 missionaries. We ended up raising support for 17 of 18 because one of them, I don't like him. No, I'm just kidding. One of them, the trustees gave us like support tiers, and one of them we actually said, that guy is right on the appropriate tier. But everyone else got a raise. But not just that, because there's so much more that's going towards support of monthly missions, one of them got a raise, and we said, let's get 8 new ones in here. So yeah, that's what you should celebrate. So, we're getting rid of this bucket. And you're like, wait a minute, I've grown up with this whole designated giving thing because you know what? There's not just a missions bucket. There's a whole bunch of buckets. There's a new equipment bucket. We've had people designate money to buy these projectors, to buy speakers, just different things that's designated. We designate money for benevolence. Some of you have been very faithful giving to our benevolence program our funds so we can help people. There's Speed the Light. This is a giving program of our youth. They learn stewardship and they learn generosity, but they help missionaries with transportation and communication equipment. Vision 2020, you guys rocked it on this. If you're new to Radiant, this whole building was painted. The floors are all new. Vision 2020 was something that we did at the very end of 2019. That was a designated giving project. There's disaster relief. You guys have responded when there's been natural disasters. We've made a plea saying, hey, there's been a hurricane or there's been an earthquake, and we've received a special offering designated for disaster relief. Facility upgrades. Some of you have designated funds to put the mulch in the playground or the mulch around the garden. There's different things where you have stepped up generously and designated funds for that. BGMC, very similar to Speed the Light. It's our kids giving missions-oriented program that allows to teach kids how to give. Camp scholarships. Do you remember last May I sent an email out of nowhere, out of the blue, and said, hey, we have some families that could use some help sending their kids to kids camp and youth camp. There was no warning. There was no follow-up. There was one random email that half of you didn't even see because you don't check your emails. But nonetheless, you guys responded with great generosity and blessed families, sent their kids to camp. Designated giving. We designate for missions trips. And then there's the rock star bucket in this church. Dinner's on us. Go ahead and clap for Dinner's on us. Dinner's on us. Yeah, so let me talk about this designated giving thing. Designated giving, it works. Many of us have been in churches for all our life that works and operate that way. But at the same time, there's these buckets and there's more buckets. And what happens in the weakness of this is it can become confusing and hard to keep track of because we don't speak about these buckets on a regular basis. It's pretty irregular how often you hear about it. Some of us are aware of some of these buckets and others don't even know that those buckets exist. These buckets actually, really, in reality, they're competing with one another for the same funds. There is, and finally, these buckets can be inefficient, which I know it sounds like not a churchy word, but it's true, and I'll illustrate it here in a moment. So here's the idea. Isn't the world just easier if they said we've already got rid of the missions bucket? What if we just shoved all those buckets that way? I'm going to keep that one. And replace it with one bucket. Then you're just thinking of two buckets. You have, I'm going to tithe to support the church, and we're going to launch something today called Kingdom Builders. Kingdom Builders, let me describe it to you. But listen, you don't have to think, actually, where's Maya? Is she here? She might be home, but I went on the church website and messed with the financial stuff. There's only two options on the drop-down menu. You ever click that button and all the things come up, and it's like do options? You have two options right now. There's the general giving, and then there's Kingdom Builders. You can still give to the Kathy and the Campbells. There's a link for that. But on our drop-down menu for Radiant, there's just two things, because I want to illustrate this two-bucket method. And let me talk about what that is. What is Kingdom Builders? This is the second shift I'm talking about. Kingdom Builders, the question, what is Kingdom Builders, may be the wrong question. It's probably who are Kingdom Builders. Kingdom Builders are those who are committed individuals and families who prayerfully commit to give above and beyond their tithe to reach the lost, serve the poor, change the world. In other words, Kingdom Builders is about building God's kingdom. I want you to notice it did not say Radiant Builders. You may remember from 2 weeks ago, I said Jesus is the one who will build his church. And since we know God will take care of his church, we can turn our attention to the thing that God is looking at, his kingdom, expanding. He will build this church. Jesus will build this church. Jesus will build Radiant. Let's turn our focus to joining him in building the kingdom. The more we do, the more I believe God will bless us, because there's this whole blessed to be a blessing thing. Let me read Matthew 25:29 to you once again. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given. and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. This is about how do we use well what we have? How do we better use what we have? And I'll explain a little bit how this works. Kingdom Builders is about investing in missionaries, ministries, and organizations all around the world who are doing strategic work with those who need it most. Kingdom Builders is project. Just remember that, project focus. Now, if you think about all these little buckets that were up here a second ago, they're all pretty much just projects. Well, now we have a giant bucket for all the projects. It's project focused with an emphasis in 3 areas: global reach, local impact, and next generation. We have a project list that is divided in those 3 sections, and we actually have a catalog. How did I not bring the catalog? Give me one. Thank you, babe. I love you. That, if you're watching online, you're checking this out, that was my wife, so just relax. Global reach, local impact, and investing in the next generation. The tithe goes to the general fund. This is how we operate our church. This is how we do everything as a church. This is about the local church. This is about the global church. Why shift to Kingdom Builders? Let me give you a couple of reasons. First of all, I believe that using we don't need to do the let's hold off on that. We're going to have a catalog to give to you of the different projects here. But this is we're going to give this to you towards the end here. I have a little bit longer to go. I believe that we'll make a greater impact with Kingdom Builders because these projects are proactive and not reactive. There's going to be no surprise email for me on a random Saturday afternoon in May that says we need help with camp scholarships because it's already in here. Like, we've planned this thing. We know where we spend, and not only that, we've gone above and beyond and said, how much more can we do if it is planned and we're proactive about it, rather than waiting for a need to come to us. Greater impact. We have a plan, we have goals. And let me make this assurance. Every dollar that you give to Kingdom Builders will go to these projects that are here. Every dollar. None of it's going to sneak in here to run the church. Now, let me say this. The vast majority of in here is missions oriented. It's going out to either our neighbors or around the world. There are some projects in here that are related to Radiant, but it's not for the operation of Radiant. There is no there's no operation money, but there's outreach money for Radiant outreaches. There's no maintenance of the church, but there is upgrading of the church in this bucket. And you'll see it. It's all laid out here. But let me tell you, the majority is money that we will send out. When I say there's a greater impact, let me just do some math for you. If we make our budget and we tithe $54,000 to missions, which is $20,000 more than last year, and if we hit all of these, if we hit our goal for Kingdom Builders and fund all of these projects in the next 10 months through 2022, we will send over $120,000 out from Radiant to reach the world, to feed the poor. Yeah, no, that's a pretty big jump. That was the most pathetic clap. You know why? Because you're thinking like, $120,000, you're insane, Jerome. Yeah, I'm insane. Can I tell you? I sat there, and I've been talking about this for a while with the trustees and the elders, and I sat there, and I made this list. I worked with the missions committee, and I had a list. You can ask the missions committee. Amy Barker's right there. She's like, Jerome done lied on us because he gave us a list of $80,000. But I talked at the very beginning, when the Lord put this on my heart, I felt like God dropped $100,000 in my heart. And I kind of played it safe and came up with an $80,000 list. And I legitimately, seriously got convicted and said, "Okay, Lord, we're gonna shoot for $100,000 of money to collect and to send. And if we don't make it, guess what? Oh no, we didn't give $120,000 out to the world. We gave 104. I can live with that. That's a pretty big jump from 34. You're gonna get this catalog. You're gonna see the different projects. That's why we're shifting to Kingdom Builders. Not just that, but greater efficiency. And here's the one I've been waiting to just throw on you. 2 buckets are easier to give than one, right? Than a bunch of buckets. 2 buckets are simple. It's easier to give. And if we can remove obstacles to giving, people will give. Have you ever been to a charity's website that's not put together really well? And you start to enter your information, and they want your address, and they want your birthday, and they want your name of the girlfriend from high school, and you're like, oh, why are you asking all these questions? And you just walk away, you don't give. So we're making it as simple as possible, but not just simplicity. What happens sometimes with this multiple buckets is money gets stuck. Dinner's on us. Let me use that as an example. Everyone loves Dinner's on Us. It's like people know us in this community because of Dinner's on Us. And people believe in Dinner's on Us. We have faithful people who serve. We have faithful people who give and contribute to this. But let me tell you about Dinner's on Us. Last year, because of the vision of this church to feed people in our community, our neighbors who need a meal, you gave over $16,000 to Dinner's on Us. Yeah, clap. The thing is, it only costs $7,000 to run Dinner's on Us for the entire year, which means $9,000 of Dinner's on Us money is sitting in a bank account that we can't spend on anything else because it's designated to Dinner's on Us. It's stuck. The money is stuck with this system. When I was preparing for this, I heard a story of a gentleman who made a $25,000 gift for his church that was building a building. He says, I want to pay for the steeple. But they built the building, they didn't have a steeple, and then he died. That church has $25,000 in the bank that they can't do anything with because that man can't say, well, we could redirect the funds. Can I tell you what $9,130 stuck in the Dinner's on Us account? And now you're thinking, well, we'll just use it this year. Yes, but people will continue to give to Dinner's on Us, and we'll just continue to get stuck. $9,000 in 2021 could have put roofs on 7 homes in Guatemala through our partnership with Living Gateways, and built a house in Jinja, Uganda through our partnership with Kathy Cenero and Dragonfly, could have purchased supplies for dozens of Westfield youth who don't have the means, or not just the means, but don't have the things that are required just for them to attend summer camp. We're not even paying for their tuition. They just don't have the stuff to go to summer camp. Through our partnership with the Westfield Youth Alliance. That's greater efficiency. Because this kingdom builders are going to say, hey, we're going to fund Dinner's on Us. We're going to give Dinner's on Us everything it needs. But once we fund that thing, let's build a house. Let's put some roofs on something. Instead of just money that's stuck. I said this a couple weeks ago, there's more money that's in the bank now than there has been since I've been the pastor. I sleep really well, but I'm not here so I could sleep well. I'm here so we could lead. We could change the world together. Third reason why we're shifting is I believe kingdom builders will foster a heart for God's community, for God's mission, Luke chapter 12, 34, wherever your treasure is, the desires of your heart will also be. We know this verse, but oftentimes we reverse it. We think where your heart is, that's where your treasures will be, because we think of treasure as money, but that's not what's going on right here. What he's saying is, where my treasure is, I will put my heart being my attention, my money, and my energy. Randy Alcorn, who's a Christian author, writes, as sure as a compass needle follows north, your heart will follow your treasure. So treasure isn't money. Treasure is that thing that you look to fill your heart, that thing you put your confidence in, your career, your status, your family, your security, your faith. What do you treasure? That's where your heart's going to go. Here's how you figure out your treasure. You fill in the blank. If I could only have this blank, then it'll all be worth it. And then I will be worth it. How do you fill in that blank? That's your treasure. They're the things that we use to define us. You may remember the Lord of the Rings. What was the treasure in the Lord of the Rings? The one ring, my precious. We all have a precious. In the Lord of the Rings, they wanted that one ring, and whoever had it would do anything they in their power to keep it, because instead of them possessing their precious, that little ring possessed them. But when you're generous to the things of this world that seem to have a hold on us, that seem to possess us, they begin to lose their grip on us, because giving really is the antidote to materialism. So, I bet you people show up to the business meeting now, but we'll get there. Kingdom Builders fosters a heart for God's mission by placing God's kingdom at the center of our soul, makes God's kingdom more precious as individuals and together as a church. And my prayer is as our heart for God's mission grows, that we will begin to do things that we're not currently doing. I would love to see more outreach in our community. I'd love to see more engagement with our neighbors. Kingdom Builders is not about just giving money away. A lot of it is, but it's about giving our lives to the call that God has us and the reason why we exist on this corner of 161st and Cary. Finally, the third shift, which is not a corporate shift, it's not a bookkeeping shift, it's a shift that I would ask you, because it's different from what we've done in the past. I'd ask you to ask God, seek God and pray. Pray for what? A pledge total? No. There is no pledge cards with Kingdom Builders. Can I say that again? There's no pledge cards for Kingdom Builders. Woo! Where are you guys? I want you to ask, seek, and pray for a plan, a vision, and a dream. Let me challenge you to have a plan. A plan is the foundation for a lifestyle of generosity. Everyone loves spontaneous giving. It makes us feel good to respond in the moment, but spontaneous giving, as great as it is only momentary generosity, and it's not enough to build a lifestyle of generosity. The Bible speaks of having a plan when it speaks of generosity. Paul writes to the church in Corinth, you must each decide in your heart how much to give. And don't give reluctantly or in response to pressure, for God loves a person who gives cheerfully. Decide in your heart how much to give. So have a plan. Decide ahead of time what you will give and make that a commitment to God. No card, no counting, you and God and your spouse. Make a plan, write it down. Write it down on your monthly budget. Then you know that's a serious commitment because you're holding yourself accountable. For some of us, it's $5 a month. That's my son. I just made him. I won't do that to you guys, but he has to now give $5 a month. But for some of us, it's whatever, 50, 100, whatever it may be. Make a plan and begin to work towards living a lifestyle of generosity, being on mission together with God. See, this is the tithe that operates a church. This is about obedience to God. But Kingdom Builders is about being on mission with God. Heather and I had this conversation recently. I think this is what we can do. I have 2 kids in braces and 1 kid in college. A couple other things that we're spending our money on. And I looked at her and said, I think we can do this. But like it's not a wild, crazy dream. It's just I think we can do this. Let's make it happen. Let's be committed. Looking at what God has blessed us with, I think we can do this. That's a plan. The second thing is this: get a vision. You have a plan, and a plan is a great simple step towards creating a lifestyle of giving, of generosity. But a plan doesn't necessarily test or stretch your faith. For that, you need a vision. What can God do beyond my plans? What can God do beyond what's in my hands? You don't have to tell me, but I bet you there's a number in your mind that you're like, man, God, if I could give that to these things, to the ministries of this church, to the ministries around this community and around the world, if I could do that, Lord. But it's going to take you showing up and showing off. He's already here. He's omnipresent. I understand. But you know what I'm saying. Something that's beyond what I can do. Have a vision. I would imagine that if you really, really, truly ask God for a vision of what He could do through you, it would be intimidating, it would be scary. Probably should be intimidating and should be scary. So you should pray about it. Pray to listen. And if you're married, you probably ought to pray separately. Don't be surprised if you pray separately, you come together and you're like, I was thinking this, and they were like, oh, I was thinking this, and it's the same number. That works sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't. Just go with the higher number. But when you agree on that number, write it down, pray over it, work your plan, pray over your vision, and then watch God supply. I'm not here to raise funds for missions, and I mean, sort of I am, but I'm here to raise faith in believers. Watch God supply. And then finally, dream a God-sized dream. This is something that I'm going to throw out there. What if God did something that's wild, above my wildest dreams for a vision? What if God really wanted to teach me that I'm believing for vision of faith is just peanuts to him? What if God wanted to wreck my world and show up in a way that says, Jerome, your God's too small. This is who I am. Something way beyond what I would even dare to ask or write down as a vision. Something absurd. What would it be like? How could I give if I didn't have a mortgage? That's a God-sized dream, because I'm on this thing for like the next 30 years. 28. What if I could flip this and live on 10% and give away 90%? That's a God-sized dream. Let me be clear. I'm not asking you to do this. I'm saying, ask God, what's a God-sized dream? Then I would say, if you have a God-sized dream, something that would just be absurd, don't tell anybody about it. Hold it. Because just maybe, God shows up and shows off, and you'd have an amazing story to tell. But even if that God-sized dream never comes about, what would happen is that dream keeps us on course. It stewards our plan and our stewards our vision to give and be a part of what God's doing. It helps us to move forward. Now at this time, I'd like to distribute this Kingdom Builder catalog. This lists all our projects for 2022. The trustees are going to come around and give you one of these. And I asked the trustees to do this for a couple of reasons. And I already kind of gave up my reasons. The trustees are spiritual leaders, because money is spiritual. The trustees are taking a step of faith, trusting God's going to provide the needs for this church by saying, God, we're going to tithe. We're going to follow the biblical example that you give us as individuals. We're going to do that corporately. There's no biblical mandate that says a church organization has to tithe, but we're going to do it as an act of worship, not as an act of law. I don't want you to be shocked when you open this thing. Oh, no, I already told you. It's $100,000. $100,000 for Kingdom Builders. The vast majority of it being sent away from this place to partner with missionaries and missions organizations that are reaching those we cannot reach. A large portion of it going into this community, whether through the outreach of Radiant, like Dinners on Us, or with partners like Student Impact, Westfield Youth Alliance, Open Doors. We can be a part of building something bigger than this little church on the corner of 161st and Cary. We're shifting to this approach because I believe this allows us to better do exactly what it's entitled: build the kingdom. Would you pray with me? Actually, no, let me tell you one more story. Mostly because when I was done prepping for this, I hurt my back. I didn't hurt my back when I was done prepping. I just hurt my back now, but just stick with me. I stood up from my desk and I thought, golly, Jerome, you're going to really walk into that church service and say all that stuff tomorrow. I confessed to one of our elders yesterday, I feel like I'm leading a different church. The last 3 years, I've grown accustomed and comfortable. I have a way to do things. But this is scary. I'm needing to be a different kind of guy. Whatever brought us to this great place of health that we're at as a church isn't going to get us to the next thing. And I remember, in that moment, I thought back to when you called me as your pastor. We sat upstairs with the different committees, and I don't remember anyone saying, Jerome, here's what we want. We want you to preach nice messages so that we can be comfortable and enjoy ourselves on Sunday morning and live happy lives. What was said to me is, Jerome, I want you to lead us. Lead us. Be the under shepherd of the great shepherd who's going to lead this church to be who's called us to be, to do what he's called us to do. So as much as this scares me, if it scares you, good, because we're together. But let's do this. I think 2022 can be an incredible, incredible year.